Hello, everybody, and welcome to GamerVision. I am your host, Jeff Brown, very generic. Yeah, he's procedurally generated Tony. How are you doing, Tony?
Doing wonderful today. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. In the last episode, we talked a little bit about Metroid and
hmm
emulation and stuff, and it was a topic that was actually uh, gifted to us by one of our viewers. We got them. They're growing. They're out there. Uh, but
Yes, it was a wonderful conversation too, and one I would love to revisit again at some point in the future. I know with the N64 stuff that's come out recently, emulation is still on people's minds, and so that may be one we have to revisit again at some point.
it's definitely there was a piece of the conversation that we started getting to towards the end of the episode where we were talking about game preservation and how publishers are now they're starting to realize, maybe we shouldn't have deleted all those files
Yeah,
from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s
yeah.
because we can just go back to those.
And we're starting to see more and more just how bad Nintendo is at it. Um,
Yeah,
but that's a
that's
topic for another day.
that's another one of those huge topics that we could probably spend an hour, 2 hours, three
Oh,
hours talking
absolutely.
about just the joys of Nintendo and how they want things done their way.
hmm
Um, but with that previous topic, we also gained another topic that people are kind of wanting us to talk about, and it plays a little bit into that game preservation that
hmm
was brought up with the last episode, and that's remakes, remasters, reboots. The re's that don't deal with Resident Evil.
Yes, and what are those terms,
Yeah,
and what are some examples of those terms? And I think we've got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about today.
people see remaster and they're thinking Final Fantasy VII remake, despite the fact that there's remake in the title.
Yeah,
They think that every game that is getting a remaster is going to be getting that treatment where completely from the ground up it's being retooled for
yeah,
modern platforms.
yeah.
And
Remake and reboot are the two biggest, most popular terms, and that's not always what those things are. A lot of the
yeah,
things that we're getting are really remasters of older games. Um,
yeah,
Things like Skyward Sword is a remaster of the Wii game. Um, that is
it's,
essentially the exact same game with some small tweaks, some a nice fresh coat of paint, that kind of
yeah.
stuff.
The gaming industry has been around for a little while now. Just a few decades. And over that time, game development has gotten more and more expensive. Things
Mm,
take longer. I was watching a video a couple days ago that talked about how Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, and Final Fantasy IX were almost yearly installments.
yeah,
Like
which almost
seven,
never happens anymore.
yeah. Now within the time frame of those three games coming out, we get typically one title,
Yeah.
if that.
Unless the
Um,
studio is really big, like a Ubisoft, where they can have
yeah,
one team working on an Assassin's Creed game, another team working at the exact same time on the next Assassin's Creed game that would come out a year later, and they just sort of overlap their studios. But most studios don't have the ability to do that kind of thing.
yeah, and in some cases, a lot of companies they'll just in like with Square Enix, they'll just slap Final Fantasy on something and say, "Oh yeah, that's a Final Fantasy title," without it actually really being tied to Final Fantasy. And they're
As
starting to kind of do that with Dragon Quest
as
as
long
well.
as it
Like,
says Faraga somewhere in the game, it's a Final Fantasy game. Nintendo has been really good at the remaster. They haven't really done the remake a whole lot. Um,
yeah,
Zelda is the biggest franchise I think that people can point to with remasters. We've got Wind Waker HD, we got Twilight Princess HD, we got Skyward Sword HD. Pretty much, if they
yeah,
slap the letters HD at the end of it, you know it's a remaster. It's going to be
yeah.
the exact same game, the exact same experience, just prettied up and slightly modernized for a newer console generation.
With modern platforms, with modern development cycles, it is much more expensive to build a game from the ground up.
Oh, absolutely. I think Square
And
Enix has learned that very, very well
yeah,
recently.
yes, that's it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of money to be able to completely remake a game. And like what we're seeing with Final Fantasy VII remake, it was taking such a long time. It's a much larger project than
Yeah.
what a remaster would be. But people want to see remakes.
See,
But
I don't know that I agree completely with you there. Like with Final Fantasy VII specifically, what I would have been happy with was if they had taken Final Fantasy VII, the original PlayStation One game, and they had just redid all of the graphics from the ground up, given you the same game, um, just prettier. Like the
yeah,
PC HD thing, that was no, that's not that was a nice
it,
effort, but not what
yeah,
we wanted. This is just me talking, but I think a lot of people really want more of that. Um, at least people that played the original game. Now, someone
yeah,
like my kids who never played Final Fantasy VII when it originally came out on the PlayStation or the PC, Final Fantasy VII Remake is more of what they'd want because they want the more modern take on that
yeah,
experience. They want the same, you know, a remake is the same concept, the same basic story elements, just completely redone with new controls, new
yeah.
graphics, new everything. Like it basically throws out the formula from what was originally there and gives you the same kind of game, the same
Yeah.
basic game, but just completely reimagined.
Some people mention, well, are spin-offs considered a remake? Because like a spin-off kind of takes what you know about an experience or know about a story or characters. Like Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, it was
Okay,
a
yeah, okay, I
spin-off
see
that
what you're talking. I see what you're saying.
um, where it takes the idea, takes the concept, and then just kind of does something different with it. Final Fantasy 12 Revenant Wings is another one that took characters from Final Fantasy 12, but then kind of created this like tactical
Yeah.
RPG
Okay. Yeah.
type of thing with it. And in some cases, it goes completely off the wall, like the that Pokemon Conquest game where they took Pokemon
Dude,
and Dynasty Warriors,
we need
and they
another
were like,
Pokemon Conquest. I
maybe
love that game.
maybe a remaster, remake, maybe a reboot of it. Uh,
Anything. Just give me more Pokemon Conquest. That game was fantastic.
Another like recent it was a spin-off, but like Detective Pikachu being
Yeah.
kind of a spin-off of the or Pokemon Snap, stuff like that. So like I think spin-offs are more original
Yeah.
concepts, but they
Yeah.
still they utilize things that you know
They
about something
might
that's
have
already
things that are
existing.
familiar, but are really their own separate thing.
So, but now the question that I want to throw out there is, what do you think of reboots? Like, what's your stance on reboots? Like, what do you think?
I mean, I
Like,
think they're necessary in some cases. The biggest one that comes to mind, at least the one that comes to mind for me first, is Doom. Uh,
okay,
where Doom 2016 completely, they just basically took that franchise and started over. Like you've got
yeah,
Doom, you got Doom 2, you got Doom 3, you've got all of those. But Doom 2016 is not really a sequel to those. It is a completely fresh start on a series. Uh, and I mean, I think that was the right thing to do with them. You could have taken Doom One. I think that game is really kind of short. That is not a game that you could put out now with shiny HD graphics and expect to people to spend
yeah,
$60 on that. You have to do something like the complete reboot of the franchise and just go crazy with it. God of War is another one. I think that technically is sort of a sequel, but I think also God of War, um, where they went from the Greek mythology stuff over to the Norse mythology. I think that is sort of it's like a soft reboot of that
yeah.
franchise. I think they
Another,
I think they link God of War enough to the older titles that is really sort of a soft
Yeah.
reboot, pseudo sequel to those. Another
Tomb
franchise that
Raider.
comes to mind, I was
Oh,
just going to
yeah.
say Tomb Raider, um, where that was a hard reboot of that franchise. They took
Yes.
everything about that and just completely started over. Like this is a completely separate canon from the original Tomb Raider series. Uh, Brand new version of the character. I think she's younger this time around.
Yeah.
Um,
Much more realistic looking.
yeah,
But
and
yeah, they're
they just retooled everything about the game. Like it feels kind of like a Tomb Raider game, but it's completely fresh. It's completely new. It's its own separate thing.
but I kind of wonder if like they were looking at it and they were seeing the rise of Uncharted and they're like, okay, we need to kind of modernize and
Yeah,
we need to, you know, hit that reset button on Tomb Raider to make it more of a viable,
yeah.
property in modern times. And they did a great job with it. I think they've done three or
Three
four
of them. There's
titles.
three. There's Tomb Raider. I think Shadow of the Tomb Raider, or it's Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Um,
Okay, and they're all very well received.
mhm.
Like they've done very well. I remember with the first Tomb Raider with that reboot. I think it was like 2013 or something, 2012. And I remember Square Enix announcing, "Hey, it sold 7 million copies,"
It's a
and
failure.
yeah, I remember I remember seeing that and thinking, 7 million copies. You're considering that a failure?
Yeah, but it got a sequel,
What?
so
Yeah, and then the sequel got a sequel, so I'm guessing I don't really know what they consider failures,
yeah, I don't know.
but
I remember I'm old enough to remember when everybody thought 1 million units was like incredible. Like it was hard to
yeah,
get to 1 million units, and now if that doesn't happen in the first 5 minutes, people think it's a failure.
I not for me. I feel like if you're going to do a remaster or you're going to do a remake, like I'm looking at Naughty Dog because they're starting to gain a track record where they're like I get The Last of Us is a big title. I get it that they're wanting to do more with it. Um, I feel like they're a little trigger happy when it comes down to doing remasters or in the case of like The Last of Us doing a remake. Um, the first game's not even 10 years old and they're working on a remake.
Yeah.
With the new generation, like with The Last of Us, it released on the PS3. Then a year later, they did a remaster
Hmm.
for the PS4. It's like, come on, really? Like you tone it down a little bit, calm down. Um, I think for me, the sweet spot would be about 2 generations. I think 2 generations is a good enough amount of time for a remaster or a remake to happen.
Don't tell that to
Um,
Bethesda. Um,
well, I
I mean,
mean, yeah, they,
I mean, they're not really saying anything. They're not calling stuff like Skyrim remasters, reboots, remakes, whatever. They're just
yeah,
saying we're putting Skyrim on something else.
yeah,
If it's got a screen, we're going to put Skyrim on it. Um,
yeah. That's it. We'll say it's the 10th anniversary, the fifth anniversary, the
exactly.
VR edition. Like I said, I think as far as like a timetable, I think 1 generation is a little too soon to do a remaster or a
Yeah.
remake of. Um,
Like you're just talking about like a port, like the Wii
yeah,
U to the Switch. Those are not remasters. They're just putting that game out on something else because they
yeah,
sold awfully on the Wii U, and with good reason. I mean,
yeah,
the system barely sold 8 million units, I think. Um,
yeah. So
so
I like just like I said, it's mostly looking. I'm mostly looking at Naughty Dog because they're starting to get that track record of being a little quick to do their remasters and remakes. Um,
I think another
and
thing that goes into that is the tech like leaps that we've had. That those leaps from generation to generation are getting smaller and smaller, so there's not really much of a reason to have to go back and remaster something. Because
yeah,
the difference between the PS3 and the PS5 is really like not that much. I mean, there's some
yeah,
graphical leaps and some technological leaps. So a PS3 remaster on PS5 is probably warranted in some cases at this point. But PS4 games,
yeah.
no, you're just talking cross-gen stuff. That those are going to be fairly similar type experiences.
Yeah, and a lot of it can be just, with the PS5 being backwards compatible with the PS4 and the stuff that Microsoft is doing with backwards compatibility, it becomes less of a necessity
Hmm.
to create a remaster of a previous title because you can just buy that copy and put it in your system. And in most cases, the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and S will, like, on a hardware level, will make the game run better. Like, granted, it won't go in and change controls, it won't, like, do more hard lifting or
Yeah.
heavy lifting. um, but, like, when I was playing Yakuza Like a Dragon, I've got the PS4 copy, put it in the PS5. It loaded faster, textures were smoother, it ran better. So, like, hopefully developers and publishers can start to, not have to really think about doing a remaster or a remake.
Yeah.
Just support the got franchise, or what, intellectual property would you like to see a remake or a remaster or a reboot
Oh, I've talked about it many,
for?
many times. The original Dragon Quest trilogy on the NES. That is hands down top of my list for a remake, and we're getting that with Dragon Quest three. It's I know why they chose three over one or two. I guess in some ways because chronologically that game is first um, in that trilogy of games. It would have been nice to just start with one and redo
Yeah,
that. When Octopath Traveler came out, immediately, like that day, I was saying the Dragon Quest series would look so good in that visual style, and we're getting it. And I am very, very excited for Dragon Quest three remake.
that's I pretty much I
There's
was kind of,
no question.
I was pretty much in that same, like, when I saw Octopath Traveler, when I'm playing through it, I was like, this is I would love to see this used for so many, like, older RPGs. Like, I would love to
Put
see,
the Final Fantasy Tactics games in that style. Uh,
which there's a rumor, and I don't know if it's how much merit there is to it. I mean, I know it's dealing with Square Enix, so it's very, very likely it's possible. But I'm hearing a rumor that Final Fantasy Tactics
I have
is,
seen,
like,
yeah,
is the next, like, IP on the docket to do something with. I don't know if it's a remake or a remaster, but if by some chance, if by the gaming gods, if it is true, I would love to see. I don't know exactly how they would make it work out, but I would love to see Final Fantasy Tactics utilizing that 2.5 HD
I
style.
I think that's probably going to be somewhat dependent on how successful Triangle Strategy is.
I will buy 10 copies of that game to try to to help get that over the line, because I would love to see.
Yeah, yeah,
Part of my like, I guess it is partially disappointment with the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster collection that they're doing with 1 through 6, because, as I've talked about before, when I saw the sprites and stuff start appearing on screen, and then the imagery of Final Fantasy stuff, gameplay wise, going, it was after the success of Octopath. It was after the Triangles uh, Project Triangle Strategy demo came out, and the people loved it. They had already announced Dragon Quest III remake using that style.
mm-hmm.
So when I saw that, I was like, "Ah, they're doing it!" And then it turned out that they're
They're
just a
just yeah,
pixel
they're just
remaster.
remastering those with the new sprites. And I've been playing a little bit of Final Fantasy IV Pixel Remaster. The thing that about that series of games, the Pixel remasters, um, I'm sort of disappointed at how samey they all look.
Yeah,
Like each of those games originally had its own sort of unique styles, and now um, it's hard to distinguish Final Fantasy One from Final Fantasy Four unless you know the
yeah,
characters. And I know there are some other games in that series that use the same characters from like Final Fantasy, like the same character models from Final Fantasy One.
yeah.
Um,
Like, and that, I guess that also leads to some of my disappointment, because, like, you know, with the limitations of the NES and the Super Nintendo, like, those platforms, like, they weren't graphical powerhouses. They like,
Yeah,
but each character, all of the characters had like their own flair to them. They had their own style, and kind of like what you're saying with these pixel remasters, they all just it's like they took a brush and they just
yeah,
you're all the same now.
yeah,
Um, but for me, I would love to see a remaster of The Legend of Dragoon, which would hopefully lead to a sequel, or well, yeah, hopefully it would lead to a sequel, because if they do a remaster, I don't need a remake of The Legend of Dragoon. But if they did a remake, I would love that too.
yeah.
Um, anyway, this is a great topic. It's one that hopefully this brought a little bit of clarity, and keep the topics, keep the questions, keep everything coming. Like, for
Yeah.
it's difficult for us to come up with these, and it's great to have people being able to say, hey, you should talk about this, because we will most likely talk about that.
Yep. If you send us a topic suggestion, there's a good chance we're going to talk about it.
So I'm Jeff, just one more level,
And I'm Tony from Procedurally Generated.
and we'll see you at the next episode of GamerVision right here on YouTube and Daily Motion and other places.
Bye, everybody.